The milliliter Benz of the 21st century is called V60 by Hario, a classic dripper which we all love to use at home. And how we use it and a really practical recipe we'll show you in this video. At my place, at your place, nearly everyone in the team has got a V60 filter in their home kitchens. Here's the plastic version. I also have a glass version and a ceramic version, David.
I switched at some point from the glass version to the plastic version at home.
For certain reasons, we will talk about that. I'm glad to have the German runner-up Brewers Cup champion by my side again, sharing his classic recipe with 5 infusions. No, we're not talking about saunas. But over the V60 we'll show David. Super good brewer that always works, really stable, even in the plastic version. You can also take it with you on the go or something. Why else do you like the Hario V60?
The Hario V60 often highlights clarity and acidity in the beverage for me, and that works for almost all coffees.
And that's why we've both used it in the Brewers Cup, both in the open service and the compulsory service. Open service is where we present our exclusive coffee, talk extensively about it, and I actually start discovering each coffee individually with the V60 brewing method. I take my classic recipe, which is a bit like yours, and then develop it further, perhaps with variations to make it unique, by carefully adding new ingredients and refining techniques over time. But, you know, that's essentially the go-to, I'd say.
For sure. I usually brew every coffee first with the V60.
Could you briefly tell us how you brew with the V60 and perhaps share some useful tips or techniques?
I usually brew 18 to 20 grams of coffee with a relatively coarse grind in 300 milliliters of water in 5 pours, even 5 equal pours. That's 60 grams per pour at somewhere between 90 and 95 degrees. Usually I start at 92. And then I just see what happens. The extraction time should be something between 2.5 and 3 minutes.
I would say so too. 240 is my golden size. David, before we get into brewing, just briefly, the physical properties of the brewer. How does the flow behavior work? Especially, what filter paper are we using?
So this is a V-shape, as you can all see now. It has these drainage pipes. Pipes? Are these pipes?
Yes, like guides, water conduits, drainage systems, exactly.
That gives it a bit of a bypass, which I really like in this dripper.
Bypass means at this point, not all the water goes through the coffee, but instead flows left or right past it due to air pockets near the drainage channels, so some water glides off and isn't part of the extraction. Consequently, certain coffee grounds may be under-extracted, leading to a weaker taste and affecting the overall flavor profile. But it's a small part.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a pretty quick flow, especially since I go there with a rough sketch. What's your standard recipe?
Mine's quite similar. Actually, it is. And I'm aiming for those 240 as well. That means it's a relatively smooth flow, although I can certainly control that through the distances between the pours. So depending on how many I give and how much space I leave in between, whether I let it sink down a lot or not, it's obviously a question while brewing drip coffee.
Definitely. And the last parameter I frequently used in the compulsory segment is filter paper. I now have the classic Hario filter paper from Japan. Sometimes I use the Siberist filter paper. The flow is fast with that, so you grind much finer, and that results in a different cup.
Today we're using a coffee that you can also get on subscription, right?
Yes, there is. It's being sent out today with the subscription, I believe. Yes. And it'll also go on sale later.
All right. So this time it's definitely not like the coffee is exclusive for the Filter Coffee subscription customers, but order later on the website.
Exactly. That's a coffee from Brazil. Philip brought it. I don't even know if you've tried it yet and where I first tried it. Well, I'm not thinking of Brazil.
I don't smell Brazil. It's honey, yeah, well.
Right, I have 20 grams of coffee in here now. For the V60, I really start with 20 grams to 300 milliliters of water. That's a pretty concentrated brew ratio. I like that.
So a bit more like 1 to 15 in the final ratio.
Exactly, more like 1 to 15. And 60 milliliters blooming for 30 seconds. Sometimes I go up to 40 seconds if the coffee is really fresh.
You pour quite strongly, so it gets a very nice and thorough soaking. Later on, you might also try this again, making sure you reach all the tiny invisible particles floating in the air. There's also the stirring method. You're not doing that now.
Exactly, the recipe really comes from championships. And you have to imagine you have 3 coffees side by side that you brew at the same time, and you absolutely just don't have any free hand whatsoever to stir or swirl.
And that's why, with the relatively strong pour, you try to reach the lowest particles too. Exactly. Now the second one was pure. At 30 seconds you went up to 120 grams, and the third one is coming right up.
Exactly. At 1 minute I tend to always vary a bit, depending on the flow in the dripper, between 30 seconds between the pours, sometimes down to about 20 seconds.
You go a little along the edge, but not entirely on the edge actually. You're like, I would say, just skimming the side, staying close to the boundary line. Half a centimeter from the edge with the brew, and then stir centrically towards, or pour centrically towards the middle. Exactly. That's very
consciously. A few coffee particles stick to the outside of the dripper, that is to the filter paper. That's what you call high and dry, and I want to bring them back down into the coffee bed. Therefore, I start by watering all around the outside first.
And you actually do this every time, although now this time you were even a bit on paper. So it's fine to put it on paper, definitely. Well, disgraceful behavior.
No, absolutely not.
Is that allowed? It doesn't happen because you have more bypass?
Well, you do get a bit more bypass. I always say if you do it the same every time, then you can reproduce it. And I really try to just pour along the first round on the paper and not everything.
So we are at 240, which means one more infusion is missing. We'll do that in about 2 minutes, and then we'll pour in the remaining 300 milliliters of water. Now on top, there's a nice but still somewhat mixed layer between water and coffee, and that's already a sign of a good extraction. You can already see it now, how everything is mixed. Water and coffee haven't separated. There aren't any floating isolated particles at the top, but it's still nicely soaked. Mixture, so that looks pretty good, though we're now heading more towards a 250 extraction.
Probably, if I were to brew the coffee again, I would just go for a slightly coarser grind, so I get a bit of a shorter extraction. So,
Espírito Santo. From Brazil.
I'm curious about what you'll say about the coffee.
A great deal of sweetness. Yes, quite a lot of sweetness. I find the herbal aspect, a nice acidity.
But I find the acidity very, very balanced, but still present and very intense.
To me, it tastes a bit like warm applesauce.
He is good. But I also find him he has something from red berries, maybe a raspberry.
Exactly. And then I think it has a dominating note. Not so much on the nutty side, not so much on the chocolatey side, but it's a very malty coffee. So if you like malt beer with a hint of sweetness or prefer something mild, their malt beer has that. It's worth trying. So this is actually a good picture. Nice. And what we can say again is it actually works almost every time. So with nearly every coffee. Again, a truly exceptional brew here. Pretty simple. No big magic. Yes, 5 times brewing, but 5 times 60 is also easy to remember, I think. You have an amount of 300 milliliters. That's a nice amount. This is also an amount that we always recommend to brew, as it is simply easier to achieve a good and even extraction with such a quantity. And then you get a good result, and it's fun, and the coffee is enjoyable too. If you want to try it later, follow the link below in the video description. And otherwise, if you also like brewing V60 and know or have other recipes or like using them, feel free to write them in the comments. Especially with V60, there are tons of ways you can brew with it. And that was our interpretation, which we brew very, very similarly, using nearly the exact same method every time. Yes, and we're excited about yours. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye, drink good filter coffee, and we'll also once again have a good filter coffee.